guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Kim. Today is day 7 and I'm going to be chatting about my top 7 non-fiction books today. It's also New Year's Eve, so Happy New Year's to everybody. Fingers crossed that 2021 treats us way better than 2020 did. Definitely in some places around the world, including the UK, things are not starting off in the right kind of footing, but there is hope with some vaccines that are coming out and things like that, so let's just really hope that things do improve in the near future. But I really hope people are okay and kind of enjoy their evening as best as they possibly can. Tonight we're going to be eating just some nice food and watching TV and playing some games, I think, so I hope that other people are able to do that as well. Anyway, on with the non-fiction books. So like I say, I've got 7. I think I ended up reading about 14 non-fiction books last year, so it's about half of them are going to be on this list because I didn't read as much as I wanted to. But with that being said, let's start with number 7, and that is The Future We Choose by Christina Figueres and Tom Rivett-Carnac. I was a bit unsure whether not to put this on the list because we read this for the book club and I really liked it, but a few other people didn't like it as much and were very disappointed with it. And so I feel a bit bad promoting a book that I know some people aren't going to like. But I did really like it myself. So what this book isn't is it's not a discussion of the science of climate change or anything like that. This is more of a book about attitudes and encouraging you to, yes, kind of be mournful of the fact and the state of the world as it is now, but still try and pick yourself up, be determined that we can get through this and just keep going. And I liked that kind of feeling it gave me of like, yes, I can keep trying to make change and not feel so desperate about the situation. It does start with 2 kind of very loose scenarios about what would happen in 50 years time if we did nothing to help the environment and if we did everything we could to help the environment. And there's kind of really highlights the fact that we have to change as a society. So it kind of makes suggestions on how we should be changing as a society. So during the time I read this of the book club, it was pointed out to me that this book is kind of elitist in that it doesn't really take into consideration those people who can't afford to make these changes. Like, yes, it would be all well and good to make the healthier options of choosing to eat less meat and buying kind of eco products and all that kind of stuff. But actually in reality, you're then having to pay a lot more money for those things. And not everybody is in a position to be able to do that. And I can totally see where they're coming from with that. I can absolutely see that. I do think though that highlights one of the important issues to do with climate change for myself, which is the fact that rich people need to act first and hardest. Because if we want eco products to go down in price and things to become more readily available for people, more environmentally options to become more readily available to different communities and all that kind of thing, then we need to create demand for it somewhere. And to me, that somewhere is the people who can afford it need to go first. So within, the Western societies, it has to be the richer people. Within the world, it needs to be the richer countries that do that first in order to help the developing countries still be able to use the fossil fuels they need in order to keep developing. So I do totally agree that these are not options for everybody, but I do think if anybody's in a position where they are able to kind of look into making changes, then it might be a useful thing to read. Although it was also pointed out that some of the things are quite obvious, and that is true as well. I think the main thing I got out of this book and why I liked it so much was more to do with the attitude, because I feel like I despair a lot about climate change and I need a bit of encouragement to kind of keep positive and keep thinking, yes, we can help and we can make a difference. And for number 6, I chose Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. So this book is about 10 years old now. It was, I think, written in 2009, I believe. And this is about Jonathan's kind of investigation into factory farming in America. So not only factory farming, he also goes to family farms as well, and he kind of compares the two. And his main reason for doing this is because he's trying to decide whether or not to go fully vegetarian or to find places where he can source meat more ethically. And then still be a meat eater in a way that's better for the environment and better for the welfare of the animals. I found this a really eye-opening book. You learn a lot about what happens within factory farms, especially to do with pig farming and farming chickens. And it does go into detail about what happens to those animals on some of the farms, some of the factory farms. He talks to workers of factory farms and goes into detail about all of that kind of thing. He also discusses the conditions of factory farms with respect to like pandemics as well. So obviously those kind of really kind of unclean places where lots of animals are crammed in together can breed disease, which can then mutate and turn into a virus against humans, and then can obviously spread around the world. And it expresses concern about the demand becoming higher and higher for meat in the world, and therefore needing more and more of these kind of factory farms. I think this was a very important book to read and to just learn about how things are run in America. And it definitely has sparked my interest to kind of learn a lot more in depth about just the practices of manufacturing food in my own country, the UK, and then also just around the world. We're all so interlinked that I definitely want to continue educating myself on where the food is coming from. I am a vegetarian, I've been vegetarian since I was 5, but I still want to know about kind of where my own food is coming from, like my own vegetarian food and things like that. I would definitely recommend this book if you're interested in finding out more about factory farming within the USA. Coming in at number 5, I've gone a bit controversial because I haven't quite finished this book yet, so it's a bit weird for me to say it's one of my favourite books of the year, but it's On Immunity by Ula Biss. And yeah, I'm very, very close to finishing. I think I have like 20 odd pages left, and I'm going to be finishing it today. Today's the last day of the year. So I wanted to include it because I'm really fascinated by this book. So in this book, basically, Biss is talking to us about what she has found out about immunization and about vaccines. There's a lot about kind of Biss's own life and her experiences as a mother and her kind of very emotional connection to this story to do with vaccines and what she should do as a mother when it comes to making decisions about vaccinating her own child. And she talks about some of her friends who are very, very anti kind of vaccine and why that is, and what kind of anti-vaccinator people are saying and what they're arguing against. And then she is arguing on the side of vaccines. But I feel like she does give quite a well-rounded view of this subject. And so far I found it so interesting. She has really delved into the history of vaccines, and there's some shocking stories you learn about in here that I had never heard about before. So when mothers and nurses used to take the disease from one child and put it into another child, and that was like kind of the original way people did it, which was obviously very dangerous because then other diseases could get mixed up in that whole process as well. There's discussion on how kind of females who practice medicine before medicine was a proper career choice, so to speak, the things that they practiced, and then when kind of the male doctors came in and their way of dealing with things was very different, and then they tried to kind of push the women out, even though the women had built up like a whole knowledge of all these different useful herbs and everything that they'd passed through the ages to help people during childbirth and things like that. She speaks about language a lot in here, so there's a lot about kind of the way we think about vaccinating ourselves and the metaphors between war, the metaphors between this and Dracula and how like kind of infecting people. She talks about Dracula a lot in this book. I need to get my head around how to explain this properly. As I say, I'm literally just finishing it now, but this has definitely been one of the most fascinating books that I have read this year. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. The chapters aren't really chapters, they're very kind of short snippets. So she goes into a lot of different areas of conversation. It seems like she has read a lot of information about this. I haven't looked in detail at it, but at the moment it does feel very, very well researched. So yeah, I think especially for today, this is an important conversation to have, even if you don't agree with everything. I'll talk more about this book when I do my wrap up in January, but yeah, for now, I'll just say that I recommend it a lot and I'm really, really enjoying it. So for number 4, I chose Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge. The first chapter of this book discusses Black British history, and I learnt a lot from this that I didn't know. The slavery that happened in Britain is discussed, how black people have been treated through the ages is discussed in this section of the book. Then Edo-Lodge goes on to discuss about systemic racism in the UK and how it is much harder as a person of colour to be treated fairly when compared to white people in the country. The fact that children are taught not to see colour in this country is discussed. Edo-Lodge discusses the TV that she watched as a child and what those messages were that she received from that, which was essentially that white person equals good, person of colour equals bad, and the effects that had on her as a child. She talks about the importance of why we need to acknowledge that different groups within society are treated different based on their skin colour, and how just being taught not to see colour isn't going to solve the problem. We need to be able to see colour in order to kind of recognise these discrepancies between groups and things like that. I read this book with my partner and we definitely had some very meaningful conversations from it. Conversations that we both benefited from. We both learnt from this. We both saw things in a way that we never thought we'd see before. There was a section on feminism in here where she talks about the importance of needing that space to be able to talk about feminism from the perspective of a black woman, not just only from the perspective of white women, and just how that area needs to be opened up and to be way more inclusive than it currently is or has been in the past. So like I say, I learned a lot from this book, and I had really, really great and much needed discussions with my partner when we were reading this book together. So I do highly recommend this too. So next up for number 3, right at the beginning of this year I read Thermas' Last Theorem by Simon Singh, and I absolutely loved this book. This book tells the story of Andrew Weil and how he solved the mystery of Fermat's Last Theorem. So Fermat's Last Theorem was a mathematical theorem that was presented in a book of other theorems by Fermat, and it stumped mathematicians for 350 years. And then in the 90s, it came out that Andrew had solved it. And yeah, so this tells the story of the maths that he needed to use in order to solve Fermat's Last Theorem. And when discussing the different maths that Andrew needed to use for that, Simon Singh delves into the history of the maths, and he talks about Pythagoras and like all kinds of other big mathematicians throughout the ages. And I found it fascinating. And I think that if you love maths in any kind of way, you'll probably love this book. It was so good. It was really, really interesting. I would love to tell you details about it now, but it has been quite a while since I read it, and I don't think I would be able to accurately remember anything. So yeah, I just say I listened to it on audio, and I really enjoyed the audiobook, so that was possible to kind of keep your attention with maths and that audio, which sometimes isn't possible. When you're listening to scientific books, it can be quite difficult to grasp sometimes, but I didn't have too many problems with that one. So yeah, highly recommend that book. Really, really great. Very, very interesting. So for number 2, I chose Riddle of the Labyrinth by Margaret Fox, and I really loved this book actually. This was just a random book pickup in a bookshop a few years ago, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. This tells the story of the decipherment of Linear B. So Linear B was an unknown text that was dug up and found on these tablets on Crete, on the island of Crete. And when they were found, nobody knew what language it was, what the symbols meant, or anything like that. And this book really goes into detail on how different people were able to piece together the symbols and kind of end up working out what this language was and what these tablets were all about. And I found it fascinating. Like, I don't know too much about language, and just kind of looking at the way language is built and how people who do this as a job, just deciphering text and stuff like that, what kind of clues they look for and patterns that they look for, I found absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed it. The book itself is split up into 3 parts. So part 1 is a discussion of the archaeologists who found the tablets in the first place, and talks about ways in which we can begin to decipher text. So the archaeologist was a guy called Arthur Evans. Then part 2 talks about Alice Kober. So she was a classicist from New York, and she did a lot of work on just looking at the tablets and systematically cataloguing every single one in order to try and see what patterns came out from the cataloguing. She tried to be completely objective as possible and take herself and her own assumptions about the text away and only look at the symbols and just see what patterns would come out. She sadly died before it could be deciphered, and so the person who ended up deciphering it is the subject of the 3rd chapter of this book, and that was Michael Ventris, who was an architect. So he wasn't kind of in this business, this was just his hobby, and he is the one that finally cracked the code. I just found it absolutely fascinating. I thought I learnt a lot from this. I've never really thought about words in this way before, and the differences between language and the written word and stuff like that, and yeah, it was really, really good. They even had a little puzzle that you could do yourself. Yeah, so here, there's some symbols here in which the author kind of took you through. So they gave you the symbols and also some words in English, and then you had to match the symbols to the English words and kind of try and use the logic of someone who does this for a living. So it was just a nice little touch to kind of just have a little go yourself while you're reading the book. But yeah, this was a pleasant surprise. Really, really loved it. And yeah, number 2 for the whole year. And then finally, my favourite non-fiction book of the year had to be Unbowed by Wangari Maathai. I absolutely loved this memoir. Wangari Maathai is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. She won the Peace Prize in 2004. Sadly, she's not with us anymore. But when she was alive, she did so much good. Wangari Maathai was from Kenya, and the first part of this story speaks about her experiences as a child growing up in a rural part of Kenya. And there's a lot of discussion on what the British Empire did when they came in and overtook the land and basically became in charge and did whatever they wanted. The more I learn about the British Empire, the more absolutely horrified I am and disgusted, quite frankly. There's discussion in the beginning of names being taken away and traditions being taken away and children in schools not being allowed to talk their native language and things like that. Then you learn a bit about her life in America, where she moved to America to study for a degree, and her experiences there. And then you see Wangari come back to Kenya. She starts the Green Belt movement, where she helps people reforest their land after all the trees have been chopped down. I just think this is one of the most inspiring books I've ever read. If you ever feel like, what can I do as just one person, then read this book, because this lady was absolutely astonishing. And I know not everybody can be like this, but to have the perseverance that Wangari did have, and to just keep going in the face of a lot of danger in a lot of cases. Once the British left Kenya and the new government came in, there was a lot of confrontation between Wangari and the government. There was a time where she was completely barricaded in her home because they wanted to, I think she was arrested a few times. I think they wanted to arrest her, or she thought they were going to arrest her, so they were talking to her. I can't quite remember the details of it now, but yeah, and she just absolutely stood her ground and would not leave her home. And to have that kind of courage, I think, is amazing. She always fought for what was right. If there was an issue, she would protest against it until it was changed, even with issues that didn't directly affect her in any kind of way. She's just an amazing person. And I feel like if you pick up this book, then you'll probably be as amazed as I am. So absolutely do highly recommend this book. It was an amazing read. Yeah, my number 1 for 2020. Okay, yeah, so those were my top 7 non-fiction books for 2020. Hopefully next year I'll be reading like a lot of really good non-fiction books. I've already got like quite a few on the go that I should be finishing in the first few weeks of January, hopefully. I'd love to know what your favourite non-fiction book was this year that you read, if you read any. Yeah, and I hope that you have a really nice new year, even though for most people it's probably not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. But anyway, I hope you're keeping your health and you're keeping safe and well, and I will see you tomorrow for day 8.